Thank you for joining this second ICF stand-up paddling webinar brought to you in conjunction with Starboard, who are partnering us for this project, and we are very grateful for their time. Our panelists today, well, for anybody who knows anything about stand-up paddling, they really don't need any introduction. They're both outstanding athletes on the world stage. They are currently ICF world champions. They came with us to China and both went home with world titles. Sonny Honchot is from Germany, of course, but joining us from France this morning, or this afternoon, her time. Sonny, great to have you on board.
Thank you for having me.
And joining us from Queensland, having finally escaped lockdown in Western Australia, he's gone to the other side of the country, Michael Booth, of course, joining us. Good morning, good evening to you, Michael.
Good morning, mate. How are you?
Yeah, we're very well.
Out there.
Very well. Now, just to let everyone know, for those who are joining us for the first time, both Michael and Sonny will present for the next best part of an hour or so, talk about technique and other things to do with stand-up paddling. But they're also kindly agreed to take questions. Now, the best way to post your questions is to go to the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen. You can type your question in there. Michael and Sonny will both be able to see your question. If you go into those questions and see something that you really like, a question that you would really like answered, just like it. And then the questions that get the most likes find their way up to the top of the list. So that's the way we can work through it. And we work our way down from the top questions all the way down. Hopefully we'll get through as many as possible. Please don't post questions in the chat column, because we don't really monitor that as closely during the webinar. So post your questions in the Q&A, and that's what Michael and Sonny will be monitoring as well. I'm going to throw it over to our panelists. They both have really, really interesting topics. Just mentioning, this is being recorded and will be posted online in a couple of days' time. And don't forget, our final webinar for this series is on this Sunday, and it involves Super Coach and Olympic gold medalist Larry Kane, who will be taking our webinar on Sunday. So we're looking forward to that very much. Sonny and Michael, I'm going to throw it over to you. Please enjoy the session, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to offer. Sonny, I'll throw it to you first.
Well, thanks first for the ICF for making this possible, and thank you to everyone who's watching. I'm very happy to be here with Michael as well, and yeah, so basically for my side, I would love to talk about a little bit about how to paddle in upwind and how to paddle in downwind, and talk a little bit about like what to look for, especially if you paddle upwind or downwind for the first time. And so for me, first of all, like because people ask me sometimes, oh, so how do you prepare for a downwinder or for a long paddle session? And I always like to start with to talk about safety a little bit. And for that, as a few things, what I tell people, it's pretty much like first be comfortable with your equipment, and then when you go paddling for a longer session, or if you do your first downwinder, go with a group of friends and regroup. Especially when you do a downwinder, like to be in a group again. Like sometimes one person is faster than the other one, so I always tell to maybe paddle like for a K or two, and then regroup again, wait for the others. If you go on a solo mission, it's always good to tell someone, hey, what you're gonna do, and when you come back, you call the person and said you arrived safe back on the beach. And for things, what you take, normally I always take a camel pack with me, and I take some water, maybe some carbohydrates in the water, or like an energy bar or something. If it's really warm, I put some electrolytes in the water. And because especially when you start to paddle, like if you paddle longer than half an hour, you need something to refuel, and some water as well to keep hydrated. The leash, it's a must, no question about that. Take a life jacket to keep you safe out there in case you lose your board or something. And then normally I wear something bright, in my case, I like to wear something pink. Michael, I don't know, what's your favorite color to be bright out there?
Yeah, any of those colors, orange, yellow, blue, pink, anything that can be seen from the mainland is always really handy.
Yeah, so my kids, it's a pink color. I love pink, and then a phone with a waterproof bag. There's some really good ones out there this nowadays. And then you can also take a flare. I had some friends I've been paddling with. They had a flare in their camel pack, and definitely makes sense as well. So yeah, that's mainly what I like to take when I go on a solo mission. Oh, sorry for that. What about you?
Some phone calls coming through. I think for safety, I am, well, when we're doing downwinds in the west coast of WA, I'm usually using a life jacket. I use my phone. Sometimes I'm doing the solo mission from like channel crossings and that type of thing. I'll be using an EPIRB, and I'll have a two-way radio as well, marine radio, that type of thing. Always a leash to the board, wearing something bright, and just making sure that I'm very comfortable with my conditions as well. Like I think one thing is having the safety gear, but the second thing is actually understanding what your ability is. Like don't go out in 25 knots if you've never paddled on anything that's not flat water before. Like make sure, I think your biggest safety tool is the thing between your ears. It's how smart you are, I guess, depending on what your level is. Like don't try and do something outside your comfort zone without somebody, as someone was talking about before, or gradually work your way up. So start in a flat water, then start in a little bit of a side chop, then a little bit of more windy chop, and then maybe start in the river, and then gradually progress to the ocean downwinders and those type of things. It's just gradual progression, I think, is the smartest thing you can do when it comes to safety. And then always paddling with a buddy, and then having the safety gear if you ever have to paddle by yourself.
Yeah. So that's my next topic. It's like the upwind. So just like you said, well, you
makes you strong.
Definitely. I mean, for me, upwind, I love to build it into my training. For example, you know, there's some people that like to put straps around the boards or put some balls around the boards, like around the board to get more resistant. For me personally, I really like to paddle upwind. But here it's the same thing. You cannot be like an okay paddler and say, oh, now I'm gonna go for an upwind session. You really have to be prepared for it, because otherwise you can get really injured as well, and or you can be in pain for 2 weeks, like what happened to me the first time when I went on an upwind mission. And yeah, so I would say for an upwind paddler, like to paddle upwind, it's good to have a certain level and to have definitely like a good stroke on you already. So, and yeah, so for me, for example, when I talk to people and they tell me like, oh, so what do you do for your training? So one of the things I personally do is paddling upwind, and the board I like to use for that, it's mainly the Ace and the All-Star. I've seen you paddling on the sprint upwind pretty good, Michael, but I think you can paddle the sprint in any conditions.
Well, I try to anyway. Sometimes I come unstuck, but it's definitely my go-to board. It has been for the past few years.
Yeah. So yeah, which for a race board, it makes it always easier to paddle in upwind as well, because you have a better line with the board instead of like an all-round board. They turn quicker than a race board. So I think for upwind, it's always better to choose a race board if you have the chance. And then I always recommend the people to start in light conditions first, to get used to the feeling, how it is to paddle in the upwind, and to not be too sore for the beginning. And then what I like to tell people as well is to focus on a point. Like, so when you're paddling upwind and you say, okay, my goal is to paddle to that buoy, always keep the buoy on your focus. So that's one of the things. And then also depends on your board. For me, when you paddle upwind, you always look the nose on your board. Maybe sometimes you have to move forward or backward a little bit. Depends on how strong the wind is, what kind of board you're paddling on, and what's your top, like, what you go paddling upwind a lot, or?
So when I'm training for events and any other training, I always recommend people paddle in the wind. I think paddling downwind, sidewind, upwind, everything is really beneficial, especially if you're training for a race or you're training for health. It's always good to sort of challenge yourself in those different environments, because that's how you progress. But paddling upwind, I think, is a key skill that is really forgotten about. Like, I know a lot of people around the place focus on downwind paddling, and they really want to get that sort of experience and that rush, and I think that's amazing. But something that I think is forgotten about is the upwind paddle, because you do have to paddle differently in an upwind paddle. And a lot of the races that we do are in different conditions. Like, you don't just have a race generally that's downwind. Like, even downwind races might have a 2K upwind wet leg, like at Molokai. So yeah, you've got to be able to understand how your body's going to perform upwind, how your stroke's going to be upwind, and how you're going to be able to adapt to those different conditions. And I think when you're paddling into wind, you're obviously going to be going slower. Your stroke's going to change slightly, because you're probably going to want to be keeping your blade in the water a little bit longer, because you're going to have to, you're sort of getting pushed backwards as you're sort of paddling into the wind. It's going to take you longer to paddle upwind.
So
your tires,
paddling.
Yeah, well, you really don't want to stop paddling, and you want to make sure that you're keeping that progressive motion. You want to be able to really track your board well as well. Like, you want to be able to stay straight. So there's a few key elements of the stroke that you might have to change, like the draw stroke or the J stroke at the back, making sure that your board's staying straight. Being able to stay on the same side for longer, I think, is important as well, because the more you're changing, the more your board's going to be turning and the less you're going to be able to track. And then I think for training wise, upwind paddling is key, because it just really makes you strong. Like, you can't really get a better session for resistance without paddling upwind. I know people use balls and use hockey straps and ropes and all that sort of stuff to get resistance training, but at the end of the day, I don't think there's any better resistance training than paddling upwind.
Yeah. So for me, for example, one year in Molokai, we had like quite good conditions, and all of a sudden there was this big rain cloud coming in, and the wind completely turned, and I thought I was going still towards Oahu, and all of a sudden my boat came by me, and they said, "Sonny, you're paddling completely the opposite way," and I had to paddle upwind. So even like Molokai to Oahu, sometimes in certain weather conditions, it's what happens, no? And especially for tall people, like I'm quite tall, and you have more difficulties to paddle against the wind. And so you have to make yourself really, like, keep yourself low. You have to drop your hips lower. You have to drop your shoulders lower. You have to try to make yourself small on the board to have less resistance paddling against the wind. And yeah, but it's one of the things which for me it's definitely a big part of my training. It's like paddling upwind, and then after the rewarding downwind. So yeah, and yeah, I think for I don't know if there's any questions about paddling upwind here.
I'll have a look, but I think while we're looking at them, I think it's key to sort of touch on that point that you were speaking about before, and really understanding your board and your equipment, especially when you're paddling in upwind and downwind. Like for me, as you mentioned, I paddle the sprint a lot, and the sprint is really key for me to be able to paddle in different conditions, because when I'm paddling in Europe and we're paddling in America, these like sort of all-round events, you got to be able to have those skills on that board. I think the dugouts are very key in messier conditions, because it does let you go that little bit narrower, which does sort of keep you going in a straight line with a bit more speed. So that's something that's really important. And then we're sort of using the all-star for like those mixed conditions as well. So I think everyone out there, it's all about making sure that your board suits your ability, and a board that allows you to sit in it, or sorry, stand on it. A board that lets you stand on it is a board that's better for you than the board that you're going to be falling in the water on, because it doesn't matter how fast you go on a really narrow board, and a board that Sonny Honchai is paddling on, you kind of want to be on a wider board that you can paddle on for the whole race. You don't want to be getting in the water, and then towards the end of the race, your legs are going to be tired, your body's going to be tired, you're going to be falling in, and it's not really that much of an enjoyable paddle. So just be really wary, people out there. Like, that's the most key point that I think I can give today is, when you're picking your board, pick a board that you're going to be able to paddle all day on. Don't pick a board that you're going to be falling in on. And don't think just because you see the elite guys paddling really narrow boards, really light boards, you have to get the same board as them. Like, make sure that you're picking a board for your ability and your conditions that you're going to be paddling in. Ross?
Yep. Sonny, I hope that's not your lunch that's arriving.
No, I'm just sometimes everyone is busy here. So
we have got a lot of questions coming in. A lot of them are quite general. So I don't know whether you want to, Michael, do you want to talk about the perfect stroke for a bit now, and then we can come back and work our way through the questions, unless there's a question there that's popped up that you want to tackle.
Yeah, actually, there's short, quick strokes against like long. For me, when I paddle upwind, what I like to do, it's like switch it up. Sometimes I like to do like very long, deep strokes, and sometimes I like to switch around and do like shorter little strokes. But normally, from my paddle style, I prefer always to go for the longer, deeper strokes, also against the wind. So.
Okay, and Michael?
Question right here.
I might just jump into my technique sort of section. I think that might be a good thing to walk through, and then we can sort of open up to questions in the last sort of 30 minutes or so, because then we can. I think I might answer a lot of questions that people have on technique through this section.
Perfect. Let's do it.
All right, I'm gonna have to spin the camera and table a little bit, but we'll make it work. That was the only place I'm sitting. I'm actually not at home, guys, at the moment, so that's why we're a little bit making it all work. So can you hear me all right?
Yep, it's all good. Yeah. Looking good.
Yeah, all good, looking good. That's what I want to hear. So I think the keys for the first thing when you're setting up your paddling stroke, you want to have a really nice foundation, a really nice core, and you want to be able to stand firm in the stroke. So what I teach a lot of is you want to have 50-50 weight balance between the ball of our foot, which is the front of the foot, and the weight sort of evenly distributed between the heel as well. So we want to keep that balance the whole way through our stroke. And I've been someone who keeps that foundation the whole time. And I find that if I've got really nice even weight on my feet, I'm not going to wobble my board. The board's not going to turn left and right. It's going to be nice and even. So that's really key. Now, when we're starting the stroke, I'm just going to adjust this camera. It's always fun. You need like a fisheye. So when we're setting up the stroke, we really want to have nice even weight on the feet. I know you can't see my feet, but you should be able to work that out. Then when we're coming down, try and feel like you're sitting into your stroke. So you want to be able to sit nice and even on the back of your stroke. You want to almost feel like you're sitting back on your heels, even though you've got nice even pressure between the front of the foot and the back of the foot and left and right. But you want to kind of have that nice even balance the whole time. A lot of people sort of lean too far forward and they're sort of really trying to reach for their strokes. And I find that really ineffective. I like to teach sort of a stroke where you sort of got 100 points. So you got 50 points in front of your feet and 50 points behind your feet. And basically what I do is I get rid of the 50 points behind my feet, and then I go out to the front, there's 50 points here. I bring that back 20, and that little 30-point scoop is the most efficient and effective part of the stroke. And when we're stand-up paddling, we're paddling for, let's say we're doing 55 strokes a minute and we're doing that for an hour. It's a lot of strokes. So you want to be able to be really effective and really efficient throughout that paddle. Like Sonny, a distance world champion, paddles 18 kilometers, and she's doing a lot of strokes, but she's doing it efficient and she's doing it better than the other girls that she's racing against at the moment, because she has a really efficient stroke for her body type. So I like to sort of say that disclaimer as well. This is the stroke that I like to teach, and it works really well for me, but everyone's going to have a different version of that. We'll throw over Sonny to get her thoughts in a little bit. So once we've set ourselves up, nice left and right, and front and back of our feet, we're really sitting down into our stroke. And what we want to do is really load up our quads, our glutes, and our hamstrings. And we want to have a nice sort of core strength here. Now, this position is something that's used in a lot of different sports, but it gives us that really nice foundation where we're going to be able to react nicely to wash, or we're going to react nicely to wobbly or messy ocean. Rather than if we're standing up, when we're standing up, we're going to be much more inclined to fall off, feel unstable, or move our board. So once we're sitting in that nice position, we're setting up to our core, we've got a nice straight back. We're sort of really keeping our shoulders down, we're squeezing through our shoulder blades, and we're keeping our chest nice and open. Now, the next part of the stroke, we want to be looking forward. So I usually teach, I like to look about one length forward in front of us or 2 lengths forwards, and then gradually steam to the horizon on where you're headed. That's something that's really key. I find if you're looking down at your board, you're looking at the paddle, you're looking at the board, you're looking at the stroke, you tend to fall into it, and you tend to close your chest down. So it's really important to stay nice and open, keeping the eyes forward. Now, once we've got that nice foundation with the legs, and we've got the nice core, the back set up, now we can start talking about the upper top arm and the bottom arm. So what I like to do is actually get the blade nice over the top. So when we're standing here, you want to kind of have the blade as nice and vertical as possible. And this is allowed through the board's getting narrower, so the narrower the board you paddle, the easier it is to get your board vertical through the water, because the blades are designed to come along the board. They're not designed to go away from the board, they're designed to come through the board, they're designed to come along the board. So that's something that we really want to work on. So the higher and the straighter you can get that blade, the better you're going to be able to paddle. Now, the next thing we want to talk about is how do we set this up? So a lot of people tend to like reach around and then try and do that. And now this can cause a lot of injuries. So this is something you want to stay away from. So when you're coming across your body like this, you can load up this muscle through here, and you can sort of load up this muscle through here as well. So when you're doing that, I've seen a lot of guys have a lot of injuries. Now, the way that we get rid of that is actually by rotating it slightly from our belly button, reaching up and getting our hand over the top of the head, and then coming down on the stroke. So you want to be pushing down not only with the top hand, but you want to be coming down with the legs as well. So when we're coming to the front of the stroke, we're setting up and then we're coming down. And as we're coming down, we want this top hand not to push forward. So I find, I still want to hit the fan here, but a lot of people tend to start the stroke here and then they sweep the stroke. And now the issue with that is when we're coming to the stroke, we tend to sweep across here. We're using this point as a pivot point. This is kind of wrong as far as I'm concerned. But as I said before, I don't know everything. So when we're coming through the stroke, I like to set it up nicely in that 30-point range, and then really drive this top hand down to the opposite knee, or at least down and back. You want to be coming backwards, not forwards. When it feels like it's coming backwards, probably pushing forwards a little bit. But if you feel like your hand's pushing forward, you're sweeping the stroke, and all you're doing is creating that negative angle. And if we're coming out here, we're setting up nice and long with that nice positive angle at like 10 to 15 degrees. As soon as we start pushing our stroke forward, see how quickly the angle of the blade changes. So by the time you get to your feet, you want to get that blade out, because if you're keeping and holding that pivot point, it's kind of forcing you to paddle behind your feet, which I find is really ineffective. So you want to be keeping the stroke nice and heavy on the catch, and then light out at the feet. Heavy on the catch, light out at the feet. Now with the bottom arm, you want to really be driving through the lat. You don't want to be pushing or like really pulling like this. I see a lot of people sort of doing that pretty regularly. They sort of load up their biceps, load up their forearms. Now these muscle groups are a lot smaller than a lat or a pec muscle, which I really want you to be pulling with. And when you're doing that, if you're using those muscles, you're tending to, oh sorry, I'm a bit distracted, but for some reason my laptop's about to die, so I just got to fix that up for some reason. All right, there we go. All right, so we're setting up, we're using our lat and our pec, and even with the top arm, we're using the pec and the lat to really set it. So if you can really control the top of the stroke with the top arm, you're going to have a better bottom arm stroke. So we're really just setting up with our rotation, slightly rotating from the belly button, having that nice catch, not overextending, not unlocking the shoulder. I like to always keep the shoulder in the socket, and then driving through the stroke, coming through, and then coming out of the feet. Driving through the stroke, coming out of the feet. But our form basically never changes. Basically, we keep this form the whole time. Basically, if you're just doing that the whole time, we're not coming forward with our top arm, we're not pulling back with our bottom arm, we're really just keeping the form and just trying to replicate that perfect motion the whole way through. Now, the next thing we want to speak about is cadence. So with my athletes, booth training, we use L2, L5. So L2 would be like an everyday pace, L3 would be just below threshold, L4 would be threshold, and L5 would be above and beyond. So when we're talking stroke rates, about L4, which is generally race pace, so a lot of the top guys now are rated about 55, and this is mainly a long distance stroke. I'm not teaching the sprinting stroke tonight. There's obviously different variations with that, but you want to be really rated around that 55. And the reason why a lot of the guys are going towards that now is because the higher rating uses the aerobic system more, it uses the heart more. But when we start to really do those long and strong strokes, we're using the muscles more. So you can really train your heart or your muscles to be lean and efficient over a long period of time. But if you're really loading them over a period of time, like say after 10 minutes, you're probably not going to notice a difference. After 20 minutes, you're probably not going to notice a difference. But after 30, 40, 50, an hour, that's when that type of stroke where you're really focusing on your fitness and focusing on your aerobics is going to be really effective. And it also gives you the ability to come above threshold when you need to, when you really need to attack in those races. So if there's any questions on that stroke, that's pretty much a brief overview, and that's basically how I teach most of my lessons and some of my one-on-ones when I'm talking to people. So, Sonny, if you have any sort of ideas or how you paddle, I know it's slightly different how I paddle, like your body shape's a little bit different to mine, so I'm sure people would love to hear how you paddle.
I mean, I love always, every time, every race when you overtake me, I'm always like watching you.
Yeah.
Trying to get the most out of it, yes.
Yeah.
It's hard to get that, but every time when I go in the water, I always learn something new. I always like try to focus on something different, and then all of a sudden some things you realize, oh, maybe I should, when you change just little things sometimes, it makes a huge difference.
Is it a big difference? Is it a big difference for how a woman would the perfect stroke for a woman compared to a man, or is it basically the same for both?
I mean, it's from what Michael described. I mean, that's the pretty very complete description, and very I think obviously as a woman, like we have sometimes a little bit well, definitely less power, but from the paddling stroke, from the technique, it's, yeah, I mean, it's pretty much what we want to reach. What we want to reach as well. It's like exactly this movement, what Michael just described.
Yeah, and I think the movement is going to be slightly different for everybody. Like when you're looking at your technique, it's not going to be like Michael B's technique. It's not necessarily going to be something Honchai's technique or any of the other great paddlers out there. Like you've got to find something that really works for you. And a lot of people are going to tell you a lot of different things. So at the end of the day, all the paddlers out there and watching this, it's all about taking useful bits of information from everybody that you speak to. And working out whether it works for you or not. Like just because you see something on YouTube or somebody's telling you something in a video doesn't necessarily mean it's going to work perfectly for you. It might work perfectly for them, and you've got to take that piece of information and really analyze it for you and then make sure that it works for you. But if it's not working, then always seek some more information and some more knowledge from any of the great coaches and paddlers out there.
Yeah, like a paddle stroke, it's like a signature. It's like a personal signature. At the end, it's what you say, you have to collect from everyone, but from the basics, it's literally sometimes when it's from someone who's just started to paddle and has been paddling for a couple of months maybe, and you just tell them the simple thing. It's like that you pull yourself to the paddle, and you don't paddle like you don't pull the paddle towards you. That makes a huge difference already. Like you completely change your whole posture on the board, and your whole that you use your whole body to paddle and not just your arms, because many times you have people they paddle like this, like I did at the beginning as well. I thought, oh, stand-up paddling, it's like you just use your arms. And then the first time when I went to Hawaii, I was like and some Dave Kalama, he was like teaching me the stroke, and he comes from canoe paddling, he comes from stand-up paddling, like and he told me, okay, you pull yourself to the paddle, like you don't pull the paddle towards you. And for me, like not coming from paddling sport before, I had completely switched my whole thinking. And yeah,
and I think it's really important for people to understand that when we're going through the water, we're pulling past the point that we're pulling to. Like we're not pulling through the water, we're pulling past the point that we insert the paddle. And that's a concept that people really need to understand. Like when they're paddling, you want to sink the paddle, you want to grab that piece of water, but you're not going to pull through it, you're going to pull past that point. And that's, once you understand that and conceptually get that, I think it makes a huge difference to you paddling. And that's basically to any paddling sport. That's a really key thing that people tend not to grasp, especially when they're starting out.
Yeah.
Ross, I think you were jumping on for some questions or something. Is that right?
Well, yeah, we've got a lot of questions there. Can I just remind people that may have joined us late, if you do have questions, please put it in the Q&A tab on the bottom of the page, not in the chat section, because both Sonny and Michael are looking at the Q&A tab, so they can see the questions as they come in. And Sonny, I know you've been looking at some of the questions while Michael was giving his demonstration. Is there anything there that's caught your eye that you want to tackle? I mean, a very popular question up the top, maybe to kick things off, is a general question about how often you both train during the off season, and what else do you do to train? Sonny, do you want to start with that one?
Well, for me personally, off season, I still keep on paddling. I focus on, of course, it's a different training. I like to paddle longer distances, but not in a very not with a lot of like power. But I like to like especially like now it's a time where I slowly put some volume into my training, and besides that, it's what I always like to do. I like to go for runs and surf. It's very important too. Like I really like to surf in the off season, and but I pretty much I try to keep myself fit during the year, and now I discovered wing foiling, so I'm trying to fit that in somehow in my schedule, and so that's pretty much what I like to do off season.
Yeah, well, for me, it's a bit similar and different. I think because in my off season, I come into summer, and I think in the Northern Hemisphere, you're going into winter, or you're going over to Hawaii, or depending on where you're going. So I think if you're a racer, you sort of tend to race up to December, and then you're sort of having December through to like midway of January off, but still keeping fit. You want to be doing different activities like surfing, like wing foiling, maybe going for runs, but making sure that you're staying a reasonably level of fit. Like it's unrealistic to stay at that peak level of performance all the way through the year. So you want to give your body that time to rest a little bit. And I tend to have a little bit of rest during the middle of the season as well. So I guess long story short, I'm trying to make sure I'm maintaining fitness as Sonny was talking about, but also starting to work on the things that I was weak at the season before. So that might be throughout the season, my left side became a little bit weaker than my right side. Then I'll start doing like a bit of bilateral exercise in the gym to try and build up the side that became a little bit weaker, because your body tends to start working in bands. But then you start to build up in your program, and as Sonny was mentioning, you start to build your volume back, because you really want to have a nice volume base at the start of the season to really help you through. So that might be that for the first 4 weeks, the first 6 weeks, you're really focusing on just getting that volume back, getting into the gym, working on those weaknesses that you hadn't been strong at the year before. Then sort of like maybe 4 weeks after that, you're starting to really work those key threshold sessions, those key speed sessions, and really focusing down on those different zones that you're going to be racing in. I think that's super important to be working on that sort of 4 weeks. And then sort of like 3 to 4 weeks out from your racing, then you're starting to really focus on key aspects of racing, like whether you're racing downwind, whether you're racing upwind, whether you're doing a lot of turns, like what are your courses for the season. Then you start to do really race specific training. For me, that's okay because I can paddle throughout the summer when I'm leading into the Northern Hemisphere summer, which we tend to race in. But for a lot of my athletes who are in Europe and up in the Northern Hemisphere throughout their winter, which is my summer, when they're sort of leading into their winter racing season, I get a lot of my athletes working on the rower, working on the ski ergo, doing a bit of running or cycling, depending on what they can do. If they can get out in the water, it's fantastic in their dry suit or something like that. But they're still working their aerobic systems, and that's something that's super key to be able to set yourself up well for something like the ICF World Champs in June next year. So there's a whole bunch of, I guess, key information that could go on for a little bit longer, but I think that sort of answers the question in a nutshell. You sort of got to be maintaining your fitness level throughout that sort of off bit, but then sort of gradually building up to those goals that you want to achieve throughout your racing seasons.
Yeah.
Should we just work through the questions from like top to bottom? I think that might be the easiest way to do it.
Yeah,
So I mean, if you're keen to do that.
Let's do that, Michael. And if you see a question there that you feel like you've already answered with your presentation, you can just refer to that. But let's try and tackle some of the questions that haven't been.
The top ones are the most liked, aren't they?
Yes,
they're the ones most people want to hear from. Okay. So well, we got Peter. Thanks for jumping on. He said, "What is more important to improve, distance per stroke or stroke per minute, or both in order to get faster?" We'll answer that. I think we answer that bit, the question first. I think it's important to improve both, depending on where you're at. So I think for every individual, it's different. Like if you're rating at 60 strokes a minute, I think maybe you need to decrease your strokes a minute. Like it depends on how effective your stroke is, how effective your technique is. But I think distance per stroke is probably the key thing that you can work on. but then also distance per stroke versus efficiency of stroke versus time over distance. Like there's a lot of different key components that you can work on here, but it's about finding that really nice balance. And I think, Sonny, maybe you can elaborate a little bit further on that.
No, I pretty much agree. I just saw like another interesting question about the feet position. Here we're going upwind, do you stay in the center, move forward or back on the center? So I think that's, yeah, I mean, for me, I when I pedal my race board, I always stay like pretty much in the middle. I think if you have an all-round board, it really depends what kind of board you're pedaling on. You might want to move a little bit more to the front, depending always what your nose is doing. So you want to keep your nose over the water, and yeah, so that's pretty much what I saw here.
Yeah, so I think that your feet positioning on the board is generally, as Sonny said, in the center of the board. I tend to have my toes on the front of the strap. But what you'll be able to notice is I think sometimes it's best to film yourself and sort of see how your board is trimming in different conditions. So if this is like, obviously, if you've got a lot of time and you've got the technique and the skills to be able to do this, but filming your board, making sure it's trimming correctly. Like you don't want your nose up and you don't want your nose down. You want to be able to really use that whole 14 feet of the board. So like if your nose is up, you're only using 12 feet forward, which is not really flying forward. So just different boards will have different standing positions, and it's something that you need to work out depending on your weight, your board, and the conditions you're paddling in. But generally, it's around the handle is where the balance point of the board is, which is where you should be standing. I think the next part of that question for Peter is the board and the paddle as important as the paddling technique in terms of distance per stroke and stroke per minute? I think for me, the board or the starboard, as we sort of mentioned in this little post here, it is really important. I think a board that suits your ability and a paddle that suits your ability is fantastic, but a board and a paddle isn't going to make you necessarily a better paddler. I think people sometimes are looking for this silver bullet where they're going to become a fantastic paddler because they buy the best race board and they buy the best paddle, but they need to learn as a paddler how to train properly, how to really use their technique to their advantage, and then really upgrade to the board. And then you're getting all these like 1, 2, 3%ers, like bang, 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 bang. And that's how you're going to improve. But don't just necessarily go out and buy a really narrow race board and the best paddle out there and think that you're going to ultimately improve like stratosporically really quickly. Like you want to make sure that you've got that board that's going to really help you progress. What do you think, Sonny?
Yeah, I think so too. I think sometimes people, or I myself too, like made the mistake that we went too narrow, too fast, and without really having the skills. And it's sometimes you really have to find your limits as well, like on how wide you really want to go, how really or how narrow you really what's your limit on how narrow can a board be for you. And I mean, now every year, like we see it with the sprint, I mean, I never thought I would paddle a 1975 wide narrow sprint. And now I'm paddling it, but I really have to train on this board. I have to train to really find my stability to make a powerful stroke. Because if you don't find this point of stability, of point of balance, you will never be able to make an effective stroke. And so I've been seeing this a lot over the years, that people sometimes, what you say, they buy they think the fastest board, but at the end they can't really take all the advantage out of it because they can't make a powerful stroke on the board. So I think it's and really train on your material, especially in all conditions. For me, for example, when I want to get used to a board, I at the beginning I go in flat water, and then I go in choppy conditions, because like that you get more confident on the board, how it's reacting in different conditions.
Yeah, and I think that's so key, that last point that you made, Sonny, really making sure that when you're when you've got your board, make sure that you're training on it in different conditions and you're really understanding how your board works, because you don't want to get into a race and it becomes a certain conditions. You've never paddled in that before, so of course you're going to have a terrible race, but you don't know how the board's going to react. So really learning your board is more key than than buying the newest board. And also, I think something that's key out there is really testing out boards as well if you get the opportunity. And like, don't think that like 23 or 27 or whatever number it is the only board that I can paddle, because a round bottom board is going to be different to a concave board. We see that the difference is the All-Star and the Sprint at the moment. We've got a concave on the Sprint and we've got a convex on the All-Star. So the number isn't necessarily key to choosing a board. It's really about making sure that you're choosing a board that you've tried, you've tested, and it's going to suit you. Don't just think that, oh, because it's that number, it's going to work. Because I think a lot of people find out later on that it doesn't. I think there's a question here. It's number one at the moment, so we'll jump straight onto it. Caroline has asked, cardio or strength training in the gym in the off season? What is most important? So I'll let you go first.
I don't have the question here.
Oh, okay. So it's cardio or strength training in the gym.
I'll just Sonny, if you check on the Q&A tab down the bottom, Sonny, you'll see all the questions pop up.
Yeah.
And at the top there, as Michael said, there's a question there from Caroline about cardio or strength training in the gym in the off season. Which one's the best? Michael, do you want to kick that off while Sonny?
Yes. So I think for me, it's really about what you're weakest at. Like if you're really strong on the water and you've got a really fantastic gymnastic background, you're really strong, strength training is probably not where you're going to get the most benefit out of. Like I think you're probably going to get more benefit out of doing the cardio training and making sure that you're sort of building up that system a little bit more. If you are quite weak and you've got a really good cardio, then you're probably the opposite. So it's really about the individual, I think, is really key to that one. I think I train my athletes very differently depending on where they're at with their stage of training, where they're at with their levels. I think, what do you think is more important, Sonny?
Yeah, it's a good point. For me, I always try to keep a balance. I never do too much of either cardio or strength. Like I always keep a balance. So I'm not really a gym person. So I like normally to do. For me, for example, my main strength training is like really paddling upwind, and I go to the gym, but just for not too often. And for me, it's the main thing. It's like really to do like I try to use my water time as like a time in the gym. So that's what sometimes I really like to go paddling upwind when it's like when the wind is very strong as well. So yeah, I think for me it's a balance in between both. Pretty much like I never have the time where I focus more on one on the other. I like to keep it pretty level for myself.
Yeah, and I think that's pretty key because you're a very all-round athlete and you're at the point where you've got a lot of different skills, so you have to keep it balanced, and I keep it balanced myself as well. But yeah, I think it depends really on what your level is what you're
absolutely,
off season. Yeah, but we've got a question from an anonymous athlete. Any tips on how to become a long distance athlete? Sonny, I guess you're one of the ultimate long distance athletes in stand up. So I think you know better to answer this question than you.
Well, long distance, I mean, from my side, I have my background is surfing, so I really like to surf, but I always like the paddling side of it. So I would say I was like pretty much like endurance, doing endurance sport before I start to paddle, so they give me a good base. And so I think, endurance athlete, you have to do a lot of endurance sports. If you come from endurance sports, it would be easier for you to become that in paddling as well. And for me, for example, it's really hard to sprint, for example, because I never really came from explosive sport or explosive training, and so I have a hard time getting ready for sprints. But yeah, definitely, like if you have a good a background where you were running a lot or doing a lot of bicycle, I think you have you just have to put that on the stand-up board and practice, and you can get you have the endurance already, so I think you can progress very quick in that regard.
Yeah, and I can agree with that as well. I think it's all about what you've done as a kid as well. I think I can credit a lot of my, wins and good results over the past 10 years because I've been training for the last 25 years, so it's it's been a gradual progression, and it's all building blocks on top of each other. And as a distance athlete, I think it's really important to maintain that level of volume in your training, whether that's 80 Ks a week, 100 Ks a week, or 200 Ks a week. I mean, some guys do that sort of stuff. So it really depends on what you're trying to achieve. And I think there's different levels of long distance athlete. Like a long distance athlete can be a 10-minute race, you know, like a long distance athlete can be an hour. It could be 5 hours, it could be 5 days. So you've really got to be working out what your goals are and really training towards that, depending on which zones you're going to be training in. We've got another question here from Andre Crater. Andre, thanks for joining us. What is your relation in percent water to dry land training during winter? Is it like 65% versus 35%? For me, it depends on where I'm at with the season, but I'd say it's about, generally, it would be probably 60-40. I think I'd probably do a little bit more of sort of cross training stuff throughout the winter. I guess it's different for me, but if I'm coaching people in the Northern Hemisphere winter, they'd probably be doing a lot more rower, cycling, and that type of thing, you know, in the gym, and then a little bit more strength work as well to try and build their bodies up. If they can get on the water, it's probably more 60%. If they can't get on the water, they might only do like 20% on the water just on weekends when they've got daylight, and the rest of the training they'll be doing in the gym, because you can still train your cardio systems just as well as you were talking about something before with that background in cycling or running or that type of thing. So you can really train your systems without actually getting on the water.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree, and especially like I mean, I see have a lot of friends who are paddling in Germany, for example, and they use the winter to go cross-country skiing, which helps a lot for stand-up paddling as well. Huh? Like you can, especially when you train like for long distance, you can put a lot of time, like for example, on the cross-country ski to get endurance for your paddling later on, and from the movement, it's pretty similar as well. So I think that's to the combination. And
I'm just going to jump in now with the next question, which is from Freddie from China. But I want to sort of make this a more of a broader question. And great to have you on board, Freddie. And I know we all had a great time in China when we went there for the World Championships. But he's asking about the new trends of stand-up paddling. And one thing we saw during lockdown is that it's a sport which is growing incredibly fast. And a lot of people have taken the opportunity during lockdown to give it a go, and it seems to be just growing so fast. Interested to hear from you, Michael and Sonny, on where you think the sport's going, what's going to be the next direction. Are we going to see faster boards? Are we going to see more athletes focusing more on one particular type? Are we going to see more people just doing sprint and more people focusing just on long distance? What do you think, Michael? How do you think things are going to go for stand-up paddling over the coming years?
Well, I think since the time that I've been in the sport, since 2014, briefly, and then sort of taking it more professionally in 2016 with Starboard's held, I've definitely noticed that the level of athlete has definitely increased, which has forced people to really focus down on one sort of discipline. Like you've got sort of key long distance athletes now, I think, already, and you've got the key sprint athletes, and you're going to have different people that they good at different things. You've got the ultra distance paddlers as well. So it's becoming a sport that I think is going to become a little bit more professional, and hopefully I'd like to see more clubs getting involved with programs of junior athletes, programs for representatives of their countries. Like we don't really have any of that here in Australia at the moment. There's sort of no local support. So I'd love to see Paddle Australia really jump on board and really start pushing this up to that next level. I think we'll definitely see the sporting Olympics in the coming, if it's not in Paris, hopefully in the next one in 2028, even if it's an exhibition event. I think the sport has every single attribute of an Olympic athlete, whether it's coming from how many nations are doing it, the participation numbers, how much people love it, like the recreational base of paddlers. As you've mentioned in the past year in COVID times, I think a lot of the industry reps and dealers and shops and brands have really done quite well, because people have really, I guess, gone back to their roots a little bit and gone, oh, how do I get out in the water? How do I experience new things? And how do I sort of isolate myself while doing activity? And SUP has been a fantastic sport that people have really jumped towards. And I think at the elite level, hopefully that will help push the sport to that next level. And there's so many great things going on for the sport. I think COVID has sort of hindered the progression, maybe a little bit more of the elite side of the sport, but I think it's definitely opened the eyes of a lot of people around the world to really get involved in SUP. And sort of appreciate it for how much we do and how much we love getting out in the water and going paddling. Sonny, what do you think?
Yeah, I totally agree. I think, yes, stand-up paddling was definitely, or is definitely the sport of this year, with social distancing. I mean, in Europe, it has been crazy. We have been seeing so many people around paddling, and it's, yeah, I think it's a racing part on one side, and then you have the people who really go out there and use stand-up paddling for fitness, for their mind, especially now it's a very intense time. So a lot of people use stand-up paddling also to just be alone, paddling, enjoying, and but then we know sometimes people they want to have a goal in training. So race, it's a good goal to have. So I'm sure in the next upcoming years we will have hopefully more racers as well on the start line, and it's always nice to see first-time racers on the start line as well. And yeah, and it's definitely nice if we can give them a guidance and help them to get prepared for the first race, so they can enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's going to lead to that gradual progression from the recreational paddler to the people paddling touring boards, people paddling racing boards, to people really turning up at events. And hopefully we see that progression. I guess what I like about the sport at the moment is sort of, it's very similar to the trends you sort of see in golf or tennis, or these sort of major sports that have a huge recreation base, which helps funnel people into the top tiers. And I think as a paddling sport, I don't see any sport that can really compete with stand-up paddling at this point. So I think it's in a really good position. We've got another question here from the anonymous athlete, which it's gone back up to the top. Is lighter always better when choosing a new race board? With the rise of lightweight hollow boards, won't they be faster than the carbon sandwich construction? And this has been a really interesting topic, and I've spoken to a lot of athletes about this. Like, there is a lot of hype around the lighter boards, the hollow boards, but people are finding, especially recreational paddlers, that getting the lighter and the hollow board, they don't feel as stable. They're not really necessarily liking, because the density of the air is different to the density of the foam. And for whatever reason, some people aren't enjoying that as much as others. But is lighter generally faster? Of course. But is it the key component to buying a board? Not necessarily. I've found that we are winning more races on the Starboard Sprint than any other board. And these hollow boards have been around for 4 years. There's no board that's winning more races than the Starboard Sprint. So it's quite an interesting debate. And I don't want to go into it too much, but we haven't found that it's any better. I think that we're working with Starboard necessarily at this stage. That can obviously change if things develop as we go forward. But I think the most important thing is to choose a board that suits the conditions that you're going to be paddling in, choosing a board that really helps you have more enjoyment on the water. Like, don't necessarily just buy a board because somebody's paddling it, somebody's promoting it. Buy a board that you're going to really enjoy, and just make sure it's a Starboard while we're on that topic. But Sonny, what do you think on that? Like, is a lightweight hollow board more faster than a carbon sandwich construction? Like, what is your experience with that?
It's like you said, it's a very hard topic to say. Sometimes, I mean, for me, if it's like I had a hollow board before, and yeah, it's different, but it's very light. So it's more sensitive. Also, like if you paddling like in choppy conditions, and so for me, I'd like to have a little bit of weight in my board, like obviously not heavy, but like for me, like 10, 11 kilos, what I have right now in the sprint and paddling, I'm super happy with that. To have like this little extra, like little bit of more, so you feel like you're paddling on something. And if it's too light, sometimes you get like, with the hollow board I had, I was like almost a little confused because it's
a different way of paddling, I think, on the hollow boards.
Yeah.
But I think what I'd like to see is a little bit more regulation, I think, coming from the federations in the sport. I think I've been trying to push this for a little bit now. I think rather than people chasing the lightest board or the narrowest board or whatever it is, like, I think we need to sort of get to a point where we choose a weight, or we choose a width, or we choose a length, or whatever it is. Like, we chose the length. I hope that stays at 14. We don't need another length, I don't think. But I think it'd be good to sort of see that sort of come into the sport, because then we don't have necessarily people trying to race everyone to the bottom. I don't think it's sustainable for the industry. It's not sustainable for the athletes. And I don't think people should be purchasing victories necessarily. I think it should come from design. But it's also great that there's still progression in the sport and in that aspect. But for me personally, I think I'd like to see more regulations around that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting, Michael, because we saw in yachting, for example, in the America's Cup, how that changed so quickly when they just started bringing in anything and calling it a yacht. So it's a similar sort of thing, I suppose, with new technology. You end up the haves against the have-nots, don't you? Because the people who can afford the very expensive top-of-the-range boards will always have an advantage. So just on that, while we're talking about boards, a question here about fin choice. Is that important? And you know, different conditions, obviously different fins.
Yeah, I mean, for me, for example, like the main difference or the main changes I have in fins is when I paddle flat water and choppy to versus paddling in downwind conditions, where I use more like a surfboard, like a surf fin, to get easier, to have a nice more looser feeling in the waves in downwind. And for flat water conditions, I use more like a straighter fin. Nowadays, when you paddle like in lakes or even like on the ocean, you want something with a little bit more of angle. So in case you hit a plastic bag, which happens sadly quite often nowadays, that it doesn't get tangled or seaweed on your fin. So, but basically for me, it's more, it's like I use for flat water and choppy waters, I use one type of fin, and then I just change it if I go for downwind. I use more like a surf fin.
Yeah, I'm basically the same. Pretty similar. I use a long base fin for flat water, so it tracks really well, but it's quite short fin. And then for like bigger conditions, you're sort of using the rake back fins with a little bit more volume. And as you feel more stable, you get smaller and smaller, because the smaller your fin is, the more ability to turn you're going to have. And the bigger your fin, the more stability you're going to have, but it's going to be a little bit harder to turn. So let's go to the next question. Unless Ross, do you want to grab one that you think?
No, I was just going to say we are heading towards the end of our session, so
oh, right.
No, but we have time for a couple more. So maybe if you both just want to go through the questions there. I think Sonny, you answered the question about already about paddling downwind between wind wave and swell. I think you answered that earlier on. So I'll get both of you, if you want to, just have a look and see if there's any other questions there that jump out at you that you feel like you want to answer, and then we can wrap up for the day. Just reminding people while Michael and Sonny look at those questions that this whole session will be online in a couple of days' time. So if you know somebody who you think will benefit from this or would have liked to have seen it but couldn't join because of time problems, please alert them to this session. It will be online. And just reminding you that this Sunday we'll have the final one of this series, and it will feature Larry Kane, who is considered one of the best coaches in the business, of course. And like Michael, he comes from a different sort of a canoeing background. He won an Olympic gold medal, of course, Larry, and is now one of the top exponents of stand-up paddling. So that's on Sunday. So Michael, Sonny, any questions there that jump out that you want to tackle?
Well, there's a lot there. There's about 35 questions there. So what I'm going to say is, if anybody out there really wants a question to be answered, jump on the Q&A, like the questions, because we're going to answer the questions from the top, because they're obviously the ones that people want the answer the most. Give you like a minute to answer that. We'll probably just start at the top and then come down. I think that's probably the easiest way to do it, because we're just definitely not going to get through 35 questions in -2 minutes. So I think from Cedric, for both of you guys, how many boards do you play with to cover any races, any racing conditions, and what sizes and what models? So I think we've answered that question a little bit before, but sprint, ace, all-star, flat water for sprint, all-star for all-round conditions, waves, upwind, downwind, sidewind, course racing, that type of thing. And then ace purely for ocean conditions and downwind and messy conditions. I think Sonny, you probably back that up. It's pretty standard for those boards.
Yeah, 100%. That's the 3 boards I have lying out here right in front of me. So
yeah, very good.
You both want to tackle this question about do you paddle on one side during a sprint race? What's the best technique for that?
Oh, that's a big question. Sonny, go for it.
Okay. As a amazing sprinter, well, let's say I'm not the best reference for a sprinter because my main discipline is long distance. But when I paddle and sprint, I go a little bit like I switch a little bit the position on my feet, and I put one feet a little bit more in the front than the other one, and then I go on I call it the chocolate side. That's my strongest side. And I really try to keep, depending on the length of the sprint, if it's like a 100-meter sprint, I try not to switch positions. I really try to paddle on one side, on my best side.
Yeah, I think that's pretty key at the moment, especially if we're racing over these like 200-meter distances, which I don't do a lot of either. I sort of focus on the long distance stuff as well. But from what I've watched and what I've studied of the top guys, there is a particular technique they're sort of using now, and they're using that sort of slightly staggered stance and sort of doing all their strokes on one side, paddling down the 200-meter part. I don't find that as effective for long distance because of the change and because of the wobbling of the ball when you're changing your feet, moving your feet around, all that type of stuff. Some people find it effective, but I really don't teach that stroke unless it's a purely sprint racer who really wants to get good at sprinting, which is honestly not that many paddlers out there. I think most paddlers are out there to sort of really participate in distance races and 10Ks or 20Ks, and sort of I sort of see stuff as a whole going towards the more sort of marathon running path rather than the 200-meter spectacle, even though they both have very much their place in the sport. Yeah.
But that's also interesting because like even for long distance, I always have the tendency to paddle more on one side than on the other side. And it's what we talked about it before, like in the off season, you really try to work what you mentioned also before on your weak side, because like sometimes when we go on the water, we don't think too much, and we always end up paddling on our better side because that's the side we favor it, we feel stronger on. But like especially in off season, like I always try to concentrate more on my weaker side.
For sure.
Yeah.
All right.
Ross, you got any key questions to go?
No, Peng's just asked a question, and Sonny, you touched on safety when we started, but just talking about potential dangers when paddling downwind, especially if you're a long way from the beach. Obviously, fatigue is a big one, isn't it? But there are other potential dangers there when you're paddling downwind.
I mean, potential danger. Yeah, I mean, one time I lost my board when I was paddling for a downwinder. I was paddling on Maui, and a big wave hit me on the outer reef, and with the wind, the board is gone so fast, so you have to like swim behind it. So you pretty much you have to be prepared for everything, and but at the same time you can be just prepared so much, and then something can happen. And but yeah, mainly what I also can tell people, if in case you lose your board because your leash, my leash broke, and that's when the wave hit me. And people have the tendency to grab the paddle first before they grab the board sometimes. And I always say, okay, forget about the paddle, just focus that you catch your board, because it's the thing which it's gonna keep you over water. So yeah, and then what can happen out there? It always depends, like weather, sharks, depending on where you paddle, something on you that you might cramp up. So I always say it's important to watch a weather forecast before you go on the water as well. And if you can, always go with someone else who is in the same level than you are.
Yeah, I just back up everything that Sonny said. I don't really have anything to add. I think you sort of covered everything.
No, that's fantastic. Guys, look, thank you so much. I should mention both Michael and Sonny do coaching, as you can probably tell from their expertise. If you check out their social media channels, they are both very experienced coaches, so go and check that out, and I'm sure they would be happy to give you more insights and to take you on. And who doesn't want to be coached by a world champion? Let's face it, it's a wonderful opportunity. Speaking of world champions, we have our world championships next year, of course. We went and checked out the venue last week in Hungary. It looks fantastic, and we're very much looking forward to having everybody there in Hungary. Balatonfüred, I think it is. That's how you say it. We better work that out before we get there, guys. In June next year, so put that in your diary. Michael, Sonny, thank you so much for taking the time to join us today. We've had a lot of interaction, a lot of people, a lot of love coming already from the audience. They've very much enjoyed your presentation today. It will be online in a couple of days' time. It's probably already up on Facebook if people want to go to our Planet Canoe page, and it will be there if you want to go and relive the best moments. Michael, Sonny, are you both? Michael, I know you're in Australia, so you're out on the water and training and doing lots of things at the moment. And Sonny, you're chasing the sun.
Yes, I'm going to jump in the water right now. So
yep, you're going to make Michael jealous. Thank you both.
I don't think so, not through winter.
No, exactly. France in winter versus the Gold Coast in summer. Yeah. And also, you don't have any COVID, I don't think, in Australia at the moment, whereas France, it's gone crazy again. So
yes.
Everyone should stay positive, by the way. We are going to get through all of this, aren't we? And this time next year, we'll be wondering what all the fuss was about, because everything will be back to normal. Fingers crossed. Thank you, everybody.
Very much hope so.
Yes.
Yeah,